podcast, The Working Poor. I want to kick this podcast off by talking about a man named James King. Back in 2014, he was attending college at Grand Valley University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He was approached by police who were unmarked. They were not in uniform. They had misprofiled him as a criminal who was wanted for nonviolent petty crimes. He was, in fact, not this person. The story has been reported by IJ.org, Forbes, among other sources. So after he was misprofiled, he thought he was being mugged, as the police did not state who they were. They attacked him, they choked James. A passerby, a woman, saw what was happening, reported it as she claimed that he was being beaten to death. And then James was taken to a hospital, and after he was treated, he was taken straight to jail, where he had been charged by the police. They offered him a plea deal after he'd been bonded out for $50,000. He turned the plea deal down because he stated he felt he did nothing wrong and he was attacked and misprofiled. So he took it to court, where he was acquitted of all charges. But due to qualified immunity, um, uh, the police officers who attacked James will not be charged for police brutality. They were not charged, which is why James has brought his case, has appealed his case to the Supreme Court, to ensure that police officers are held accountable for their actions. A judge under qualified immunity has to determine whether or not police officers have issued signs of police brutality. So James is appealing his case to the court in order to make sure that police officers are held accountable for their actions. So my question for the panel is, what is your reaction to James's story, and how does police brutality impact America, and more specifically, the working poor class?
And it's also
Yeah,
important to note, too, I think that these police officers didn't identify themselves. One of them was a federal agent, and neither were in proper uniform. So
right.
he didn't even know that he was in trouble with the police or anything. He just knew that he was being attacked.
Yeah, they took his wallet. He thought he was being mugged.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the woman's video, then it probably would have been a different story. I mean, I'm sure it happens all the time. I'm sure that was a major piece of evidence that led to his acquittal.
In the video, he said he was walking to his internship. I'm not sure what profession he was going for, being in college. And he was like scrolling on his cell phone or texting, so he wasn't really paying attention. And he saw these two figures come up behind him, and they weren't in police uniforms. So stealing his wallet, he thought he was being mugged, like you said. And then they ended up kicking him in the head and stomach. And if you watch the video that's posted underneath this, it's just it's just an atrocity of what they did to him.
And I also think that had this gentleman had a different background or been a different color, there might have been a very different story in court too.
Oh, completely. There are 933 people in the United States were shot and killed by the police in 2019. 331 of these people were white, and 212 of these people were black. And being that black people are a minority in America, there's obviously a disparity here. Says a lot that it's taking a white man to finally get a case like this to the Supreme Court, when there's been issues like this so many times, and we just keep turning the other way because the people are of color.
And I watched the video, hearing that he was in the hospital. They beat him up so badly that the ambulance had to take him away in a stretcher, and then from there, he went immediately to jail. That is guilty before being proven innocent, number one. And as I'm watching the video, I'm just so infuriated as to, I just want him to sue their ass, you know? And so, like, I'm glad he was acquitted, but holy shit, he needs retribution because it was just bullshit.
And that's why this
And
federal case is so huge, because he's not, sitting down taking it. He's really going after repercussions.
and I'm so glad he is because, wow. And if a lady spills coffee on her lap at McDonald's and she can get $5 million, he needs to sue their ass.
The more important factor is if the Supreme Court decides in his favor, it'll set precedent and it'll change the way policing is done,
And it's just scary because it just brings up the situation, who do you go to in circumstances where police are being aggressive toward you, or showing signs of, police brutality, and, you feel unsafe. And this man, he thought he was being mugged. And that is why, he was quote unquote resisting, they claim, because he claimed these men were unmarked. He obviously was not the person they were looking for. And so what happens in this situation? And when you're a member of the working poor and you can't afford representation, what if James's situation had been different? He's being represented by a group, the Institute for Justice, right now. I don't know how much they are playing into this, but and I don't know how much money James has. But just imagine if this, were in situations that happen all the time. People are poor, they don't have money, they're attacked by the police, and they can't even raise awareness because of the repercussions that comes with. And just going back to a time a few years ago, when we lived in an apartment building, me and my family. My sister was outside. She was talking to her friend who was in a car. And then the police pulled up and started to raid an apartment across from ours. And, my sister at the time was 17 years old. And, a police officer ended up coming up to her and telling her that she had to go inside. My sister's in the parking lot, away from everything. Our parking lot where we were living, she was told to go inside. She was, granted, she was a teenager, kind of loudmouthed, said, she wasn't going to go. Well, the police officer ends up throwing her to the ground, trying to arrest her. My mom approaches, who is disabled. She's on Social Security. She was in a car accident, broken jaw, stuff like that. Approaches just saying, hey, don't, hit her type of thing. And then he throws my mom to the ground. Me and my friend are like sitting on the balcony seeing all this. We're just kind of screaming, saying, hey, she's disabled. You can't do this. Then we have about 3 police officers chase us up the stairs until we have to run into the apartment. We run in, lock the door. Stay in there for about 30 minutes until my sister and my mom walk in, and they ended up letting them go. But the thing is that, well, they just attacked my mom. So, we didn't know what to do. This was a situation where we felt that we had just been completely violated our rights, and my mom was disabled and attacked and thrown to the ground over nothing, and they just let it go. So what does that say? Well, we called the police. Little do you know it, 5 minutes later, an ambulance doesn't show up, but those same couple police officers show up, arrest my mom, take her to jail. She ended up bonding, out $500, I think it was, that we didn't have, and then had to end up taking a plea deal because we didn't have money for representation.
Oh,
so these things happen all the time. And go ahead.
And she never got any medical attention from all of that?
Oh, no medical attention. Thrown in jail over it. Just roughed up a little bit.
Is she visibly disabled? I mean, to look at her? She like in a wheelchair or something?
She's not in a wheelchair. She just, you can tell she's had major, facial reconstruction. She's, very small. She's very defenseless. And many, and that's the thing, how do you profile a disabled person? The idea is we did notify, we said she's disabled. And at the end of the day, when we were trying to right a wrong in this situation, what we felt, it was completely met with force and an arrest at the end of the day.
And when it came time for restitution, they have all the power. You didn't have the resources, and they win.
And now we're seeing this play out with James King. But like I said, I can't help but imagine, what if he didn't have a whole Institute for Justice backing him? He
Exactly.
would just
He's got the resources that millions of Americans don't have, like your mother.
James King's bail was $50,000. 10% of that is 5,000 that his family had to scrape together to get him out of jail where he didn't belong in the first place.
Who knows? Maybe they have the money. I mean, it's likely they do, or we wouldn't be hearing about the story. But the point is,
Maybe,
he,
maybe
he
not,
had the
because
resources, he
he
had the
in the
means. That
video he's in the video he says that it was his brother saying we don't. He says to his brother, they're saying $50,000 bail, and he said I know, and he said we don't have it. He said I know, but we're going to get you out. We're going to hire a bondsman. We're going to do something, and they managed, but I don't think they had $5,000, $50,000, or $5,000 in their back pocket.
This was the Institute of Justice that picked it up, right?
that's who's representing him in this.
And it definitely sounds like a pro bono type of thing.
it's also very high profile. I mean, that makes them fight because everybody wants to win that high profile case. A public defender in a small town is not going to fight the way that these people are going to fight for him.
Mm-hmm. When you think of rural communities and small towns, these things happen all the time. I'm from a small town, and yeah, there's never any coverage down here. There's never anything down here that gets represented in those cases. So many of these things happen. And just go swept under the rug because rural communities are just so neglected in general. And so much of the working poor come from rural communities.
When you call 911 for an ambulance and you get the people who did the damage to you instead, I mean, where do you go? Who's going to help you?
It's because at the end of the day, the police are in charge and we're at their mercy. And
Yeah.
like you were saying, Austin, this does happen all the time, everywhere, on all different levels. One time when I was walking home from work, I was carrying a plastic bag with a few things like my uniform and pens and receipts, just random things. I was stopped by two police officers and another car parked behind them, and they came up to the two came up to me and said that they were looking for somebody and they wanted to see what was in my bag. I took everything out, put it on the sidewalk. It was dark. They had flashlights. They just looked at everything and they said okay and left. No big deal, except I was left there in the dark to pick up all this random stuff. And
Without the flashlight.
for something that I don't even know if I fit any profile or anything, I was just somebody walking and I was at their mercy. And that's the thing. Everybody is at their mercy. And whether it's a small incident or a huge incident, these things happen because the police are in charge and we're at their mercy.
Yeah, well, that was a typical stop and frisk. That's exactly what that was.
Yeah, yes, it was. I mean, they searched your bag. They didn't have a search warrant. I don't know what constitutes that. It has to be a house, has to be a car. I don't know.
He could put up a fuss, and then he's gonna have more trouble. Where's he gonna go? Who's gonna help him? Or the police?
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
and
Yep.
it's just in that type of situation where the citizen is the one left to de-escalate things when there is no
Yeah,
Mhm.
problem to be. When it should be
exactly.
exactly the opposite. The police should be around to de-escalate
Exactly.
situations.
You're the one who has to behave. You know.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. People though to not be able to see that it's just the small things like that. It doesn't matter if it's just them searching your pocket, which is a big deal, or if it's them shooting you in the face. The idea that the police have an entitlement to your rights to determine what you do in any given place is a resemblance to an authoritarian state. And when we just allow this and we don't, if the Supreme Court does not vote in favor of James King, then what does that say about where we are as a nation, where we're going to allow police to physically assault someone? There's just such a movement today, against domestic violence, against sexual assault. But who can do it? Famous people, the police, and politicians, and those are the only people that get away with it, and nobody should be getting away with it, and the fact that they are is just disgusting.
But justice protects them. It protects the cops. It protects the politicians. It protects everybody in power. Case in point, Eric Gardner, who was selling loose cigarettes on the sidewalk, was held down by the police and said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Everybody remembers him.
Yeah.
5 years later, that cop got fired. He managed to keep his job for 5 years. Everything was okay. Everything was good. There was talk of suspending him with pay. I guess maybe he was suspended with pay, but only for a short time. He worked for 5 years before he was fired, before there was any restitution for that at all.
And that's the thing. These people act like a gang. They're back out on the streets doing the same things, or at least allowed to do the same things that they've been doing to citizens. And it's sickening.
Yeah.
One thing I want to go back to Peace's story about. I mean, that one it ended fine and no damage done. But what if he happened to have some pot on him in that bag or a switchblade? It could have been a different story. You know, he's still the same guy doing nothing wrong, minding his own business.
And that's just the thing. They're supposedly looking for somebody. I don't know if that was even true or not, but they're supposedly looking for somebody. They stop anybody, and then they have grounds to either let them go on or arrest them or even allow it to get physical.
Cops are supposed to be there for us. They are supposed to be our protectors.
Well, we pay their salary.
Yeah, tell that to the cop that pulls you over.
As a teenager, I pay his salary.
They are supposed to be there for us. You know, like you said, we pay their salary, so they are there to protect us. They're servants, and they just abuse their power. Too many of them abuse their power. I'm sure there's a few nice ones out there, but I really see them as harassing us more so.
And it doesn't matter about whether they're nice or not, or if they're a good cop or a bad cop. It's that the institution that is in existence is profoundly corrupt, and that's not about good cops or bad cops. It's about the entire system and the way that it's allowed to operate and encouraged to operate.
And then you look at the police in Europe, where 90% of the police walk around without a gun. And I understand, gun law. I understand there's different gun laws in Europe, and citizens don't typically own firearms. But it's still a topic for discussion. There's no reason, especially me. I'm in a town with 500 people. Why do we have a police officer who we're paying to literally just drive and circle around the town looking for trouble, looking for somebody that might be drunk walking home, to pull them over and arrest them for public intoxication and put them in jail for a night? He's carrying a gun. There's no reason he should be equipped with nothing more than a taser. I just think about, we're sitting here talking about, I just think about situations, I've mentioned, Peace has mentioned, and if we were black, these situations would just be even worse. And, there's so many black youth just in America that, just have to worry about that so much more.
Yes.
And I think there needs to be a topic of conversation. When do we talk to children, and when do black parents talk to their children, especially, and people in marginalized communities? When do they talk to their children about how and when to be able to protect themselves against hostile police officers? Because it's just an issue we don't talk about. And, there has to be a system of, well, you can call somebody, but there isn't. So what do you do?
Well, I think black children, or any child of color, deals with it in school, deals with racism, and that's when you have the talk. And their talks come all through life, at every stage of every little problem that they have. that's when you talk about this stuff. And you're hopefully teaching your kids to treat people with respect. But when the people that you're respecting are disrespecting you, it's extremely difficult, and it's a conversation in every household that needs to be talked about. Needs to be had.
Now,
I'm
when
go-
I get
Go ahead.
pulled over by the police, I get annoyed. I get frustrated. I know you have too. You've gotten angry, Cindi, at the police when you get pulled over. You're
Yes, I
black.
have.
When you're black and you get pulled over, it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
I wanna bring on our guest for this episode, Travis Washington. He is the author of the Hands Up Act. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring him in on this conversation.
Hi, Travis.
Hey,
Hello.
Travis.
Hello,
Nice to meet
hello.
Mm.
Nice to meet you as well.
Hello. Thank you for coming on the show, Travis. This is the Working For podcast. So, Travis, how are you tonight?
Phenomenal.
So, just for a little background, me and Travis first kind of met when I was a reporter at the Daily Egyptian, and he was the president of the College Democrats there at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. And I had reached out to him to do a feature over his group, and we ended up doing an interview. There wasn't exactly enough sources that he ended up bringing, so the story kind of fell through. But after that, Travis kind of stayed connected through the DE and ended up doing a story with a reporter, Emily Cooper, about his Hands Up Act, which he's authored. And according to what I know, Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, that's been kind of recirculated by some major magazines, including the New York Times.
Yes.
So, just we're on the issue here. The conversation's kind of started. I know you know the issue going on with James King. How would your Hands Up Act, how would it have prevented a situation with someone like James King? And then how is a situation with someone like James King different than other situations that we kind of hear about in the media?
One, I want to say the biggest issue with the James King thing is I think during this time of the coronavirus, this is what people have been focused on. Like, for example, 2 days ago, another person was shot unarmed by the police and nobody's talking about it. Like he was just shot 3 times in the back. And what the thing with James King is that, like, with my hands up, it's all about it's all about the punishment. The Hands Up Act is around like making sure police officers that shoot people unarmed are punished because so many of them go unpunished. Like in 2017, it was 69 unarmed shootings, right? Only 4 of the officers were prosecuted for that crime. So what I'm trying to do is bring in a balance and some type of accountability. And one thing I began to realize, like with James King's case, when people's like, "Oh, the guy is white," to me, when a police officer is brutal, he really doesn't care for the color of your skin. If I can take advantage of your body, if I can do damage to you, then I will. So that's the situation that I saw with the James King. It's like it's just now getting filmed. That's all it
Travis,
is.
would your Hands Up Act protect someone like James King since there was no shooting involved?
Um, my bill will only focus around shootings. The bill, you know who Eric Gardner is?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. His mother is focused on physical violence. That's a whole different legislation. And when I
Oh,
talked
wow.
with
That's a shame.
huh?
It should be it should be more than just shootings. It should be police brutality in general. I wish it were broader.
Yeah. But everybody has their own bill. Right now, I came up with mine's focused around police shooting. But Eric
Hmm.
Gardner's mother and Eric Gardner's mother, Al Sharpton, and are working on the physical violence right now. They're trying to come
Okay.
up with the Eric
And
Gardner bill.
Travis, the
and
article I read is a couple months old. It says you contacted 102 U.S. representatives. Do you know how many you heard back from or
I don't
any?
want to give out their names, but only 3 contacted me back, sadly. But one of them did give me a judiciary number, and I was talking to one of the staff members from the judiciary committee.
Were any from Illinois, Travis?
I don't want to give out too much information, but I do have good news. There's a rep in Atlanta who's going to pursue the legislation and working on the bill as we speak.
Hey,
Oh wow,
Excellent.
that's amazing. Travis, you talk about your bill, how it is more so further along the lines of protecting citizens when it comes to being shot at by the police. And you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned how everybody kind of has their own story. What do you think the similarities of kind of an extreme measure of being shot by the police? How do you think that kind of compares to kind of everyday police brutality? I know Peace here, just mentioned an instance, he was walking down the street, kind of had a stop and frisk situation. So
Mm-hmm.
how are those situations similar, and then how are they different? And should the legislation that's being brought forth in Congress, where should the gap be bridged at, or are these pieces of legislation, should they remain separate?
That's a really good question. To me, I think each legislation should be separate. Like I'm focused on shooting, and somebody else is focusing on physical violence. Like for example, I love to use the civil rights movement. Dr. King first he did the civil rights movement, then he did the voting rights, then he did housing discrimination. So for me, I'm focusing on shooting while Eric Garner's mother is focusing on the physical violence itself. I want to say how physical violence from the police and physical and shooting violence is all compared in the same because it all is terror. Like it's terror. Because one thing what a lot of people don't realize is, like I said this in my TED talk, was my dad's cousin was tortured by a police officer, and he was forced to admit to a crime he did not commit to, and he served
Mm-hmm.
years in jail. That officer named John Burge used to tase black men in the testicles until they admitted to crimes, right? He was a cop for 25 years. Then we have police officers in Dalton, Alabama, who were Nazis, right? They said they were Nazis, and they were on the police force from 1994 to 2015, and they planted drugs on 1,000 black men. So it's the shooting, the planting of drugs, and the physical violence all comes down to terror. But I feel like we need to take one bill first. Once you pass one legislation, it'll lead to the next legislation. It's like building a brick house. You can't start from the top floor. You got to start from the bottom.
Well said.
Travis, one of my concerns, what I saw with the stop and frisk when they made a big deal about that and they made him stop doing it in New York, I think it just I think it drove it back underground. It wasn't legislated, but it was still going on. It was the people that were affected, their lives did not improve. Wouldn't I be worried about something like something like this kind of a bill, that the cops are just going to be more careful? They're gonna have an extra gun on them to plant on the victim that they shoot. I think
So that's a good point. But one thing I want to say is that I found this newspaper. Malcolm X did this speech in like 1962 or 1963, right? Where he was holding a newspaper and it said 7 unarmed Negroes shot unarmed, right? This was before body cameras even came out.
Mm-hmm.
We have multiple witnesses that can attest to the situation. We have blood analysts that can tell you how the body died and this, that, and the other. So one thing is for sure is like I hear what you're saying. Once this law passed, how are we going to make sure it is held to standards? So once it passes, I think all of us have to be very vigilant and call things out after the law has passed. But I tell you what, even if the police officers do change, it's better than somebody getting shot 15 times in the back or something. Now the police officer has to think before he pulls that trigger.
Right.
It's the same thing. Like you ever drive on the highway and see those signs where it says, if you hit a construction worker, it's a $10,000 fine and $10,000 fine and a 14-year prison sentence. And it's funny how we become more vigilant after we see that sign.
That's true.
And Travis, I don't think what you're saying, what this bill isn't intended to be a final step. It's not meant to say, we're just going to stop police officers from shooting unarmed people, which that's the intent of the bill. But it's sort of a building block, is what you're saying. Like,
Yes.
There's this bill, then there's a bill with Eric Gardner's mother, and then there's other bills because this is more of a systematic thing. There has to be a movement. We have to take this from the ground up, and you're starting very much at the ground up. And I think that's a wonderful thing. How much how much exposure, have has this opened any opportunities for you, this authoring this act?
Meeting actually the biggest opportunity, the biggest blessing was me meeting Michael Brown's mom and Tamir Rice's mom. That's when I was like, okay, this is legit. And then I sometimes ask my friends, like, I call her Hannah. I was like, when did you think this petition was legit? She's like, once you reach 80,000 signatures. When I asked, like, my mom, she was like, Travis, I thought only a few people were going to sign it, but once it reached 300,000, I was like, it was real. So I want to
Wow.
hear, like, yeah, what people think about it. That was the business. I knew it was going to only get bigger from here. It's just, once again, we're in the coronavirus area where it's like we're kind of going like 10,000 people died in Italy. A lot of people really don't care about police brutality. I met with another. I don't want to say her name because I don't want to give her credit because she doesn't want to pursue my bill. After the unarmed shooting that took place in Chicago, I met with an alderman, and then this alderman was not trying to pursue the bill. She just wanted to do it for the attention, and then all of a sudden this coronavirus happened and it's like the conversation ended. Do you guys remember seeing the Twitter video where the dude was shot 2 times in the back at the train station?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm like. It's getting exposure. It's making it. It's just the topic changes so quickly because people don't want to talk about it. It's awkward.
Well, like you said, 2 days ago there was a shooting, and there's no media coverage on it.
Yes, it was in New Mexico. No coverage whatsoever. And there was another thing that was finally released where this story is kind of scary to me, where the police officers gouged a man's eye out during the interrogation room, and they just released the video and no coverage.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Incredible.
speaking of the coronavirus, and actually speaking of this conversation, there's actually been increased police brutality, and I know it's been reported in other countries. On April 2nd, the president of the Philippines ordered police officials to kill people who defied orders of lockdown. So,
Yes.
Travis, and everybody else too, how do we prevent police brutality from increasing in situations where there might be a national quarantine, or if martial law, God forbid, was enacted?
Yeah, I would love to hear what some of the commentators have to say on that one because that's incredibly scary to me. Because I posted that Philippines article on my Snapchat yesterday because I'm like, he killed 10,000 like drug dealers supposedly in this country. They're like he's just the executioner out there, but it's going to be incredibly hard. I still see people protesting. I'm trying to think in Lebanon, even though there's a coronavirus, they're still protesting for better financial situation. So I feel like if the situation gets deadly enough and desperate enough, people will still come outside. It just depends on the situation.
Well, in places like New York, the infrastructure is going to crumble. I mean, there's going to be anarchy because the people that are most affected are the police and the healthcare workers, and they're already stressed now. And in a couple of weeks, when things are really overwhelming, it's going to be anarchy.
Yeah, yeah, because like 6 million people just filed for unemployment, so that means that's 6 million people that have nothing else to do. So now, one thing I will say about this time, the coronavirus, which is bad, but in sports our way during this time period is going to force people to pay attention to the news more, because
Mhm.
the whole purpose of the creation of sports was to distract us from the news. That's what the Roman Empire did. They created sports to distract us. Now we're going to be forced to pay attention to this.
Well, definitely, this is going to wake a lot of people up, and I mean, people are already waking up, but this is going to do it on a huge scale. This is going to impact so many people,
Yes,
and
yes,
that's
because
a
it's
good thing.
like,
We need people to wake up.
I do, it just makes you wonder, because everybody is kind of focusing on the news now and are going to continue to. But like we said, it's so focused on the coronavirus, and just with America, and just everybody, especially people in desperate situations right now, the working poor, um, waiting kind of right on government stimulus, waiting on the next news article, being told to stay inside, watching the TV. You keep hearing, you're not going to save, it doesn't feel like you're going to save the world staying inside watching Netflix, but you're going to, because we're
Yeah.
all supposed to be practicing social distancing. But in a way, it does feel a little, and I don't want to sound crazy, but a little brainwashy. I worry that we're so involved and it like kind of just infatuated with this whole coronavirus that we're not looking deeper into other issues like police brutality and this increased police presence. And I know just like in Carbondale, before I ended up leaving there, I just noticed, more police officers being around. And I just wonder how much further the coronavirus pandemic will will bring out, other instances of this where the police are forcing us to stay inside if it comes to that.
Yeah, it's just a scary situation because at the same time, this coronavirus is deadly. But at what point does it get to like where, okay, you guys are going a little overboard? And this is a very hard balance right now. Like I said, I really want to be active about what's happening in New Mexico, like that shooting that took place. But at the same time, I know that this issue of the coronavirus, like 10,000 people died in Italy. We just had reached 1 million people were affected by the virus. So it's like you have to pick and choose, and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It is number one. It is the number one news story, without a doubt, being global, affecting so many. But what I noticed on the news is it's just taken a completely different tone than it's ever had before, where they're talking about the coronavirus, and any news stories they have are only fluff. They're not any real news stories. Like before the coronavirus hit, everything was bad. Everything, it was all bad news on the news. If you wanted to see bad news, you watched the news. And and now there's nothing bad. There's no bad news that they're broadcasting at all. It's not that it's not happening. They're just worried about keeping everybody calm and happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sedative. News is a sedative now.
And that comes down to what type of news you watch, because a lot of Western media news is very manipulative in our way of thinking. So that's why I want to tell people to expand out, because like you said, this one lady who was mad at Trump, right? She was like, "Oh, I hate him. I hate him." I was like, "What did he do today?" And then she was like, "I don't know." I'm like, "You already had that mindset going in before you heard what the man had to say." And I feel like that's very, very dangerous path.
And there are definitely instances in which both the liberal and the right both play into media misconception. And you definitely have to pick and choose your sources. And I know here on the podcast, I definitely try to steer away from bringing in very biased articles like from Fox or CNN. But then again, it does happen every now and then.
I just want to make sure that we ask, how can we sign this petition if we want to? Is it available online?
Yes, it is. It's you just type in "hands up act" on Google and you go change.org and it will pop up right away. I'm at 423,000 signatures. Please share it with friends and family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Travis.
Yes. But my final thought is that everybody stay safe, stay vigilant, watch Al Jazeera, watch RT America, Real News. Find something to do to occupy yourself. Like right now during this time, I wrote 2 foreign policy pieces that got published because during this time of quarantine, we have to be vigilant around the world and do things that are very uplifting. But the Hands Up Act is going to move forward. Once this disease dies down, once we find a cure, I'll get the police brutality will pick back up again. This is just the main focus right now. Like that's all it is. I don't want to say it's temporary, but I know once the coronavirus is out the way, we're going to be focused back on police brutality because once again, Eric Gardner's still dead, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Anton Rose, they were still murdered, and it's still in the back of people's minds.
Have you had any contact from those independent outfits you mentioned, Al Jazeera and RT? And
No. Only getting contacted by local stations like in Texas and Ohio. A lot of news stations do not want to write my story because once it blows up, it's like a tidal wave. There's nothing stopping it. And I began to realize that's why a lot of local stations don't want to print my story. Because one time WSIL, which was a local news station around my area, they were going to do an interview with me. They canceled it, right? And I woke up the next morning in the New York Times. So, I mean, it's because people do not want to talk about it. One thing I've begun to realize is that who writes the laws? What do you do when the criminals are the ones writing the laws? And if they are, then you have to be the one to change them.
Yeah. Well said.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I know your article, Travis, was the top viewed article for the DE for at least 9 months after it took off. So, I mean, the top viewed article for them. So, I mean, it's really taken off. And God, we just appreciate having you on the show. And we appreciate you out there and doing all this hard work and putting this legislation forth. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Travis.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Travis.
It was
Thank
great
you.
having
Thank
you.
you. I love to talk economics, foreign policy with you guys any day of the week.
Thank
We'd
you. We'll
love
have to call you
awesome.
back on.
we'd love to have you back on. Please stay in touch.
Absolutely.
And Travis, is there any where we can follow you on social media?
Yes. I'm a huge James Bond fan, so on Instagram it's Travy007. It's TRAVVY007. I'm a huge Roger Moore is the greatest James Bond ever. But yeah, Travis. I am obsessed with that stuff. And then also on Twitter is Travis Hands Up at Travis Hands Up, and I'll just send it to Austin too.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
We'll be
Travis.
sure to.
I just wanted to say with that closing thought he gave us, the everybody complains about government corruption, and we don't want Medicare for all because the government's going to ruin it. But the closer that we are to government, the more transparent they have to be. Meaning the more involved we get, the more we pay attention, the more we take our individual responsibilities as citizens to be the government, the more we clean it up and the more we make it what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you hold government accountable, and the more Travises there are, and the more, the people that stand up and demand change, that's how we get change.
Yes.
The Civil Rights Act didn't pass because government thought it was a good thing. It passed because people made them pass it. People
You're
stood
right.
up.
So, considering the fact that it seems like, unfortunately, that Joe Biden will probably be the Democratic nominee for the presidency of the United States in 2020. I know we all were basically saying that we were Bernie or bust, Bernie all the way, except for kind of Dan. And then I know the conversation geared to, well, maybe you would be interested in a third party candidate. And so going along with that conversation, if the working poor were a political party, if what we said here represented a political party, what would that candidate look like? What would their beliefs be? And what would the future of America be?
What I think at the heart of what everybody wants is just integrity and somebody who is not going to take advantage of the position or be in it for power. Somebody who is genuinely in it to be a servant, to serve the United States, to make it better.
I mean, that's so easy to say, but I mean, God, how many candidates sit there and say, that they're representing that? I mean, God, I would like just someone who were geared more to a candidate that was geared more toward what the average American looked like. And I feel like that everybody thinks, oh, Donald Trump was that image, which they were sadly mistaken. But I mean, we need a candidate that I think, God, comes from like a rural community and understands struggle, because so many people out there say that they've struggled or that they're working poor, but they're in Congress and they have $1 million. So I think it's just so much more than just like integrity. You know,
Well, it definitely is, but I'm just saying at the heart of it, we can't have, we would be skeptical of Joe Biden even if he were more on Bernie's side because of his integrity, because of how wound up in politics he is. We want somebody who we can trust, not just somebody who says the right things, but somebody who we can genuinely trust. And
I
that's a smaller part of it, but I do think it's at the heart of it.
I think in order to get what we really need up there as president, we have to first lose the two-party system. That's only for people with money to begin with, so that the poor people, the working poor, can run. Right now, if you need to join that debate of the Democrats or the Republican debates, you have to have a lot of money, and you're paying these private corporations, the DNC or the GOP, many millions, and that needs to stop. We just need to be able to. I mean, we have Trump and Biden supposedly running in November. There have to be better candidates than either of them.
I think the big problem is we're talking about who we want to be president. I think that's a huge waste of time. It's obvious that, I mean, I agree with what you were saying about we need somebody with integrity, all this and that, but we're looking for a hero, and one person is not gonna fix the problem. Nothing is gonna fundamentally change until we take down these corporate kings and queens, pull these oligarchs
Yeah,
out of their mansions, and take what's ours.
yeah,
Nothing is going to change until that happens. No one person is going to go get the White House and change the way everything works. Even if they got there, first of all, they're not allowed to get there. Trump was a fluke, and it turned out that he plays the same corrupt ball that they play, so it worked out. He doesn't speak president, but he still plays the same game, so it
yeah,
works.
yes.
But
And Bernie,
a Bernie Sanders is not allowed to be president. And even if he
exactly.
somehow got there, he would be the most failed president we ever saw because they would not let him do anything.
Yes. And
So I think
that's why I'm saying we need to lose the two-party system. We need to lose the like you said, the corporations, because that's where all the money is, and we need to lose the whole system. Would need to be revamped in order for a working poor person to be up there electable
and that's
at
not going
all.
to happen until we pull these oligarchs out of their mansions because
Right.
that's who's running things.
Yep.
It's not about electing a president. It just isn't.
It's not just about that, but it is about that because we still need to, this year more than any other election year, I feel, but it's been important every election year that we vote our conscience and that we're voting for people that we believe in. And that's obviously not going to be the tell-all answer is finding the right person because, like you just said, there is no one right person. But I don't think that it's wise either to say that it completely doesn't matter. And I think that we still need to be paying attention to people who are making great strides and people who are up to the task and people who do support the right things. And it's important to give them as much support as we can so that they continue to grow and grow.
All right.
Yeah.
So if we find the perfect candidate, Bernie was a great candidate. He was not perfect, but if we find the perfect candidate and we manage to vote for the third party and they get the majority of the votes and it gets past all the polling rigging and all the things they try to do and they get to be president, what happens then?
Yeah, they might not be able to get anything done, but these are voices that need to be heard and fights that need to be fought by everyday people. And it's more likely to happen if they have people that they can support for that people that they have support for that they can elect. And we need to be on that game of not necessarily the right person, maybe, but the right side of the issues. And we need to look for people who are fighting those issues and giving them as much power as they can.
I agree. I just don't think the power that we should be giving them is the presidency.
Where do you think we should put them?
Things
They'll make
things things like what Travis is doing. I mean, people, if we en masse took on these projects that were important to us, that were geared towards justice, things would change.
Right. I mean, Dr. King was not a president,
Right.
nor did he ever run or think of running, but he was
And no
an
president,
icon.
no presidents ever really affected real change. I mean, even FDR, who's such a hero, the New Deal and all that, he didn't want to do that. He was forced to do it. We were coming out of the Depression. People were angry. People needed sustenance. They needed to live. He was forced. Lyndon Johnson was forced to pass the Civil Rights Act. None of these presidents acted on goodwill. It's not in the job.
Interesting.
And I think that's why we're all saying to move away from the two-party system, to vote for people who do want to enact ideas of change, who are voicing that. That even though Bernie Sanders might not have been able to get everything passed, I think we all would agree that it'd be, it's better Bernie than anybody else. And not saying that that's the way that we're voting or anything, or the way that we should vote, but the idea of voting for change and the idea of having someone in the spot of the presidency, whatever the presidency may look like, because I, definitely think that the presidency, the role of it needs to be changed in general, and we shouldn't just have one person controlling the whole country anyway. And even though he doesn't, but there's so many executive powers they have. But I think that having someone like Bernie or somebody that is representative of these issues is important, because it all starts somewhere. And the idea is that maybe Bernie isn't that anti-establishment candidate we need or are looking for, but I think that there are people out there somewhere, and we have to find those people. We have to be those people, and we have to raise our voices.
I agree with you, but the point I'm trying to make is a President Sanders or a president, any anti-establishment, would set the movement back 100 years, because he would be so crucified and vilified. The media would attack him relentlessly. He would be worse than a President Trump. He would be the most hated president in history. They would take care of that.
Well,
So what do you think the first step is?
Movements. The movement is what's important. People in the streets. That's the only way things are going to fundamentally change. That's the only way things have ever changed.
Yeah, once we get past social distancing, we can go back in the street.
That could be part of it. It's a way to control the people,
Yeah.
They see that people are getting angry, and they need more control.
And that's what I was mentioning earlier with them, telling us to be in our houses watching Netflix, and you're not saving the world not watching Netflix, but oh, you are, actually, it's just, it's such a brainwashing kind of mindset, especially now, that's going on. And in general, we have to move away, especially with what Cindy's been saying, away from the two-party system. But Dan, I feel like
that's the first step. I feel like that's the first step. If you get rid of the two-party system, and then eyes and ears will open, and then like Bernie, many eyes and ears were open to Bernie, and I don't see Biden trying to get Bernie supporters. From what he's saying, I don't see him trying, even attempting it.
Well,
I would agree with the whole getting away from the two-party system, but if you brought in a third and fourth party, they would just be owned by the corporate shills too. That's who runs things.
It's all of these moving pieces together. I think that what we all agree on is that none of these issues can be ignored, but there's a lot of moving pieces that need to be taken into account. It's not just one thing or one solve-all or one beginning. We have to be working on all levels to fix this. We need to be
one issue at a time, like Travis is, like Travis and his bill for police, not just police brutality, but specifically police shootings.
So I want to move the conversation over now to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 situation here in the United States, and talk about that. I'm trying to find the the count for the number of cases globally and here in the United States. Just bear with me and give my computer a second.
Speaking of the coronavirus, a place that I just heard of today has 2 cases of the COVID-19, They they managed to test many of their clientele, but they did not test the staff. There's no talk of testing the staff as of yet. Because if they test the staff, they're going to cause a panic and people aren't going to come into work. I imagine. Why else would they be dragging their feet on that?
I'm sorry. I just picked up the death toll in the United States is at 7,128 with 277, 355 confirmed cases.
I want to say something about those numbers. They're bullshit. The numbers are all bullshit. There's multiple reports of doctors and nurses saying that patients are dying and not even being tested. These numbers are way off whack.
I believe that too.
We
The
don't
media
know
tells us what they want us to hear.
what.
The media tells us what they want us to hear, as it's always
Yeah.
been.
They're under strict instructions. I mean, this is a propaganda machine like they've never seen in Russia and China. And this is, this is directed information. You know.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common knowledge now between a lot of people that, like, obviously they're not testing. There's people that are calling in with symptoms and they're saying, oh, well, you haven't traveled, so you can't get a test. I've seen about it on Facebook. I know I mentioned last week
Even deaths are not being logged as COVID deaths.
Oh, well, completely.
I know I go past doctors' offices, they have these little flashy neon signs that say, if you feel sick, stay home. They don't say come in and get tested. They say stay home. Keep it a secret.
And it all goes back to the idea that they don't care, about us or the working poor, and the idea that Donald Trump has gotten a second coronavirus test that he's tested negative for. I mean, thank God, I guess, right? But anyway, the idea that he's gotten a second test, but there's so many people out here that are just wondering in panic, that are being told one thing and then another, and they still can't get a test. It has to do with so much, and it's all the systematic bullshit that we've been talking about.
I didn't know he was tested a second time.
One of the best things about this coronavirus is that it shows the dark underbelly of capitalist America and how things really work. Who gets the test and who doesn't get the tests.
Yep.
Who gets treatment, who doesn't get treatment.
And the working poor, most of us don't travel worldwide, as a normal vacation, as a weekend. And, I went, it's the rich people that are going to go to another country for the weekend, or a week here and a week there. It's not going to be I don't know. I don't remember last time I had a vacation.
Now, it's the wealthy who's bringing this disease in and spreading it.
They're the ones who are allowed to be tested. When I went to the doctor when I was sick, one of the questions she asked me was, have I traveled? And I said no. So ruled that out, checked that off. So, okay, she doesn't need a test. Did you have your flu shot? No. Oh, because you just don't do that? I felt judged.
Yeah, so what you're saying,
I guess not.
what you're saying is their way of saying, well, if you haven't traveled, you don't need a test, is their way of screening out poor people, because poor people aren't traveling to Europe or to Wuhan. So, if you're poor, you don't get the test because you haven't traveled, but really you're not getting the test because you're poor.
Yeah, if I had said, yes, I went to China 2 weeks ago, maybe then I would have gotten a test, I'll bet you. Bet you they would have pulled out something. Maybe I should have lied. Maybe that's what we have to do. Yes, I was just in China 2 weeks ago.
Well, and I just found out that one of our store managers in our company in the Clinton store got it, and he lives in Bethlehem. So He's going to the Bethlehem County.
Oh,
And where did he do all his infecting? In New Jersey. That's
yeah,
where he worked. He worked and he went home.
yeah.
I know. I was just sitting here the other day, probably about 2 days ago. The emergency alarm goes off on my phone, and it's an emergency alert saying that J.B. Pritzker, our governor of Illinois, is calling all healthcare workers to come back and fight on the front line against COVID-19. And it's just, it's really crazy, the response. And I know, how it's just, consuming so much. And I know here in Illinois, there are 8,904 known infections and 210 have died here in my state. And then in New Jersey, it looks like about 650 people have died. Like Dan said, and we're all saying that number is obviously much higher due to the lack of testing, but that's just kind of an update on the area we're in. Does anybody know anybody who personally has coronavirus? I know I mentioned last week my neighbor had ended up testing for the virus, but she has came back and she has a negative result. So good for that.
Yes, uh, I know. Well, Dan Peace and I are all in the theater, and one of our theater friends uh, was recently got tested positive for coronavirus, but she was on the outskirts of it by the time she found out because she didn't get the results for a week, and she had posted on
So
Instagram.
she was out and about spreading it
Well, she had
without her
flu-like
knowledge.
symptoms. She had flu-like symptoms, and she went to the doctor, and they treated her for the flu, but they did test her for the coronavirus. A week later is when she got her results. So I guess she was homesick, and she said the day that she got her results is the day that she finally had energy and was able to move about. So she figured she was at the tail end of it. Now I don't know if she stayed home with the flu. I assume so because it knocks you out. But a week later she's testing positive. So if she any interactions, going to the pharmacy to pick up her flu medication.
And
Yeah.
that just goes to show that ignoring this problem isn't going to fix it. We need to know who's being infected and we need to know who's spreading it. And
Yep.
people
And
need
that's how
to people need to know. People need to have that knowledge about themselves, about other people. They need to be informed.
and the countries that have had success with this disease have done exactly that. Priority on testing and transparency, figuring out what we're dealing with, as opposed to suppression. That here it's suppression. And the healthcare industry is going to be so ravaged by this. I mean, every one of them is going to be a war medic. There's going to be so much PTSD after this, suicides through the roof. I mean, it's crazy. They're going to get a national holiday when this is all said and done.
Absolutely. Yep, I was just talking to an older man the other night, and he was saying if I have a problem, if I have a health problem, I can't even really go to the hospital because they're so busy with the coronavirus and the COVIDs.
Yeah. Yeah. What about all the people who are quarantined with their domestic abusers? What happens to them?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of
All right.
going to be a lot of aftermath to this that people aren't even thinking about. It isn't even on the radar. It impacts so many different things.
I mean, yeah, there's talking about people that are going to be quarantined in their house, but there's also too 500,000 people that are homeless. So where are they going to even go to be able to quarantine?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it really not even just trying to beat the podcast beat the podcast to death here, but it really does just affect poor people so much, working poor, just poor in general. At the end of the day, and when the vaccines come, are they going to be free? What's going to happen? At the end of the day, I mean, God, Tom Hanks has gotten it. He's fine. There's other celebrities who have gotten it and they're fine. It just seems like if you're rich, you're going to be fine. just like every other thing. They say there's not a cure. There's a doctor at St. Louis University who is he says confident in a possible treatment for COVID-19. He says that they are using a drug that has worked well on monkeys that were infected with viruses similar to SARS and MARS. This is an antiviral drug called, I'm going to butcher this, remdesivir. And so there's some hope out here that maybe we'll be able to treat this for now. But at the end of the day, I mean, what if we're supposed to have medical coverage right now. What if you're poor and you don't have medical coverage? And this is a possible solution, but you don't have insurance. And then what's going to happen if you get COVID-19? And if we have to start rationing ventilators, they're rationing it by age over in Italy. Are we going to do it by class system over here, by how much money you have? Because it's just going to be interesting, and I use that and very lightly to see how it plays out.
Everybody heard, I'm asking, that Trump accused the hospitals that are requesting these masks and the PPE, stuff, of embezzling it, like going on the black market to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And he told the reporters, "You should investigate that." Really?
Mm-hmm.
You should fucking investigate it. That's your job.
Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe you shouldn't accuse people of nonsense, stuff like that.
But the truth about the coronavirus is that most people who get it will experience mild to no symptoms.
Right. Right.
It's that's the reason why it's so quiet and it's so infectious, because we're spreading it around without knowing we even have it.
Yes.
And there are young people dying. The majority of the people who die have pre-existing conditions.
I do just have to say I hate downplaying it, because yes, statistically, what 80% of people will experience mild symptoms. Well, we've got over 1 million cases in the world, so that means 200,000 people will experience negative symptoms. At this point, very extreme. And people, there are so many videos coming out now that are experiencing the quote unquote mild symptoms, but it's a horrible cough. I mean, you hear this, you see 30-year-olds and stuff in the hospital, and I know pre-existing conditions, but there are healthy 30-year-olds too. There are healthy people that are getting it, and I know this is a couple weeks old. I don't even know if I should even throw this number out there, but I remember reading an article maybe a week ago now, but information changes every day, but to where it was showing that that half of the cases of COVID-19 here in the United States are people ages, I think it was 18 to 49. So more and more young people are getting it over here than they even were over there. And the virus, and it happens to other, it happens with the flu and stuff, but this virus is now mutated. I think the number was about 8 times. So there are different strains now of COVID-19, that have, because this is already a mutation, but have mutated further. So, I mean, I hate downplaying it, because I feel like, there are people that are, getting permanently scarred lungs from it too. So to say that the symptoms are just so mild, they can be, but I worry for so many people that are going to have extreme severe symptoms that are in that 200, that are in that 20%, those 200,000 people. And just to think, if they don't have medical care in this country, they're going to die.
It is the not knowing that's always the danger. And if you're not showing symptoms of being sick, you don't know that you're carrying it. And cancer, for example, is a silent killer because it doesn't hurt. The cancer itself does not hurt. So that's what makes it a silent killer. So these people, and there are people out there doing stupid things. There was just a lady in a town near us, Blairstown, who was charged with she had bars around here are all closed, and she opened her bar, was serving drinks, and a fight broke out. So now she's cited with breaking the social distancing But that was a stupid thing. And she's not alone out there. You know, Cuomo said that he was walking through the park and it looked like a normal non-coronavirus crisis day. And and I was a little alarmed that
Was
Cuomo
he doing
also,
out walking through the park?
well, he saw people, like picnicking, and they weren't maintaining their distances. You can walk in the park, you can do that, but maintain your distance.
Parks are banned. Parks are
Important.
banned. You can walk in the park in New York because parks are banned here, and even in Illinois.
No, what Cuomo just did, which alarmed me, was he just now closed the children's playgrounds. Those playgrounds should have been closed this whole time. Why were they even open? So
Well, why
now
is there?
he closed the children's playgrounds, and now he left the parks open spaces. You can still be in open spaces, but no playgrounds.
And I know he's been very against a full-on quarantine. And I know when Donald Trump was talking about it, he was very against it. And it seems like everybody's saying, oh, he's leading us with such great stride and doing everything right. But he just closed children's playgrounds. I mean, it's probably just the
Yeah,
liberal media trying to paint him as. I even saw an article saying oh, why are we so far into the, it sucks that we're so far into the election process because Cuomo would have been a great president. And it's just so funny that you can do one thing, in this country, and everybody wants to slap, the presidency on you. And that's just funny.
because we don't have many candidates out there. The
Look for
words
a
are
hero.
funny. Yep, yep, looking for a hero, yes. Yep. Um, and I think, I personally wish we would be quarantined completely and I would just be, stationed in my apartment, outside to my balcony, but inside, like that's it. I can't leave. And but they closed the churches, restaurants, bars, but Walmart, ShopRite, they're still open. All and so people are still passing it on to each other.
Gas stations. There's a lot of places still open.
But then practicality stops me from coming up with a feasible solution for that, because I'm a caregiver. If like Who would be stuck in that group home with our residents during the whole quarantine? They would be there 24 hours.
There's always going to be people who have to work.
Hmm. And there's people who have to eat. So I don't know how I would get my groceries. I mean, if I were quarantined in this apartment, I could order groceries and I could have them delivered. And they could deliver them just to my door and I would go out to my door and get them. So I would not have people contact, you know. I could pay with a credit card online and do that. So that's possible. But
Yeah. I just have to say, being in a rural area here in Southern Illinois, I know I mention it so much. I'm going to be that type of guy. I guess that being where I'm at, living in a town with 500 people, and there are literally just two bars, we don't have an option to get groceries delivered to us. And I mean, God, me and my family, we don't have money on our credit card. We're waiting for the first of the month to get our link card to be able to go to the store, and you can't do an online order with a link card. So I'm just, we talk about everybody should be staying inside their house. I know I mentioned this before. We talk about maybe that'd be the best idea, but it's just there have to be places like Walmart open, places to where low income people, poor people can get around. And we can't just even say, well, there's a couple days, where you can go out, and then we're shutting it down, because people that are poor, like, me, and a majority of the working poor, we're all living day to day, and we can't afford to stock up. We can't afford to load up on the toilet paper, and, we can't, and it just shows a lot that so many rich people are going out and fighting over rolls of toilet paper. And it has to be rich people, because only rich people would be so concerned in a time of crisis about whether or not they're going to be able to wipe their ass with something, you know, other than
Actually,
like,
well,
go
it's not.
ahead.
It's the from the videos that I've seen, it's people like us hoarding, like
I,
throwing this old lady across the room to get the last bundle of toilet paper. They didn't throw her, but they
I think
definitely.
what Austin is saying
I
is
mean,
that
well,
most people don't
uh,
even the have have the money in their wallet to hoard
yeah,
if they
and
wanted to.
and what just getting at the idea that the people, that woman who, threw someone across for the last roll, I mean, that's the last roll. Now we're fighting over the last roll. I'm talking about in the beginning of this, the people, there's a woman, a video of her going to the Dollar Tree. She bought every single case, there was in the store. She had money to buy all those rolls of toilet paper. I know me and my family, if we wanted to go hoard up on toilet paper, that'd be the only thing we'd be buying, for the month. So it's like, the poor, working poor, can't afford to go out and hoard. And then we're the ones scrounging for that last roll of toilet paper. And maybe some people now are throwing punches over it. And it's because, well, what are you going to do when everybody's hoarded up on everything? We can only get to the store, God, once every 2 weeks, because we're in a small town where there isn't a grocery store. You don't have a car because there's no transportation in rural America that's publicly funded. So you're waiting on someone that you can hitch a ride with to get to the local Walmart to, maybe get a roll of fucking toilet paper. And that's sick.
I have seen videos of people that did not look rich having their cart full of of hacks of toilet paper just to have them. Like that is, they went specifically to the store to buy toilet paper. They loaded their cart with all of these massive, like they bought in bulk. And they don't need 6 bundles of toilet paper. Take one bundle of 12 rolls, whatever you get in there. But this lady had 6 in her cart. She did not look rich at all.
Then I hope she enjoys baking that toilet paper in the oven at 350 for 30 minutes on a Friday
Yeah.
night when she has nothing else in the freezer to fucking eat.
Yep.
That'll cook it to a perfect golden brown.
Just going back to the idea of looking of what we're looking for in a president. I understand that not one person can come save the day, but I do think that people, I think there are good people in the world. We had one of them on today, Travis, that are out there fighting for the common good of regular, everyday, working poor people. And when I think about where I grew up, I think about, like I mentioned, the lack of transportation. I think about the idea of how people who use drugs are so heavily targeted against because that's the only thing that are going on in these rural communities, and the idea that so many people are using drugs, and the idea that so many people in 2016 felt like their voice was being heard through a man like Donald Trump, because for once they had somebody say, hey, I see you, I hear your voices down in the places that people don't talk about. And I am just so worried of where like the Democratic Party is going, and in the way that Joe Biden said, slightly trying to reach out to Bernie supporters, saying, oh, there's a place here for you, and obviously there's not, and there's no voice out there for people that are working poor. And where's our voice heard at? And where are the voices of people living in rural America? Like, they're not heard. And that's one thing that I feel like, Bernie sometimes wouldn't touch on either, that I would like to see, because people here, we're the swing vote. People, if the message could be better communicated, if Bernie's message could somehow be better communicated to people here, because I just feel like when you have, Bernie, you kind of have the liberal media with him in a way, even though they're against him, but you kind of have that stigma, we're better than than you type of thing. We criticize the way you live. We call you deplorable. But we're the people that are struggling. And if somebody could communicate the message that Bernie wants $15 an hour and that would actually help you and Donald doesn't, if we could just put all the bullshit aside and find a candidate that was really just about the issues instead of we're just going to attack Donald Trump for everything. That's what I want in a president. Is someone to recognize everybody, and LGBTQ plus Americans, just the minority, because so many of them talk about the minority and it's just a brief thing, but we never actually do anything about it. And right here where I'm at, I can't even get a job right now. I'm living, with my mom because of, this whole coronavirus situation, I don't want to go into, but, it's like, I can't get a job right now. There's nowhere to work and there's not a public transportation system set up in Southern Illinois, so I just want to hear my voice heard. And I don't want Donald Trump to be the only one voicing it.
And that's where it goes back to we need a president or people, Congress, all the representatives with integrity.
So now we're going to go to final thoughts from the panel.
Sign Travis's petition. Look below the podcast and see see all of the links that are typed in there, and sign the petition for police brutality regarding shootings. Maybe even look at police brutality of the other bills as well, specifically the Garner case, Eric Garner.
I just want to say that this moment we're in is a very historical moment, a very important time. And I remember thinking, I should journal about this because this is such an important part of history. And This podcast is turning out to be a great way to document, my thoughts and feelings at a time like this. So I really want to thank you guys for bringing me in on this. It's been really good for me.
I think it's been a way for all of us to really digest and process everything that's going on.
Yep, and it's giving the working poor a voice that we haven't had.
And we all talk about it's not going to take one person to create change. It's going to take a collective movement. And even though we're here on a podcast and, all we're doing is talking, and I love what you said, Dan, about the journaling. That really warms my heart that you said that. But I'm glad this is working out. And I think this is, a great way to bring people together and to say, let's just have a discussion. Normal, everyday people talking about normal, everyday things, and not necessarily even trying to figure out how are we going to solve, this, world crises. But, what can we do? What can we do to spread information and just spread different ideology? And that's what's the really beautiful thing about this podcast. And I'm also really excited to be a part of it.